everyone, it's Maria, and welcome to the Breaking Up with Toxicity podcast. Thank you for being with me today. Each week, I will connect with people as they share relatable life experiences. We will talk about and at times challenge reoccurring unhealthy and toxic patterns that keep you from the changes you want to see as you break these unhealthy cycles. So let's get started and see where this show will take us today. Be sure to listen and don't forget to follow so that you never miss an episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Breaking Up with Toxicity. And I'm Maria Shkreli, a licensed mental health therapist, an author, and your host. In today's episode, it's going to be for the parents who feel like they're constantly battling their child or their teen. And no matter what they try, nothing seems to work. You're setting the rules, you're enforcing consequences, you're repeating yourself over and over, you're trying to stay really calm, and you're trying to be so consistent, and somehow the behavior is getting worse. It's not actually getting better. What you're being told by schools, family members, and sometimes even by professionals is that your child is defiant. And sometimes that label is accurate, but far more often what I see in my clinical work is something that's very different. Insecurity that has gone unnoticed, misunderstood, and mislabeled for years. And when that insecurity is treated like defiance, what happens is parents end up punishing the fear. And fear does not respond to punishment. Fear responds with escalation, with shutdowns, with anger, avoidance, withdrawal, or even emotional disconnection. So today I'm going to break this down in a way that parents can actually understand and, more importantly, apply. So we're going to talk about what defiance really is, what insecurity really is, how insecurity forms, how it changes from childhood to adolescence, why parents confuse the two, and what actually helps instead of making things worse. So this episode is not about excusing the behavior. It's about understanding what you're actually dealing with, because you cannot parent what you mislabel and what you don't understand. Parents are taught to respond to behavior, but behavior is not the root of the problem. Behavior is the final expression of what's been happening internally. By the time behavior shows up, a lot has already happened underneath for these children. Behavior is shaped by emotional regulation capacity, shame tolerance, a sense of competence, the attachment history of a child, and how mistakes were handled earlier in life, and whether emotions were welcomed or were they dismissed. Two kids can show the same behavior and need completely different responses. For example, let's say a parent says, "Turn off the video game." One child smirks and says, "No, I don't have to listen to you." While the other child snaps, "Why are you always on my case?" and storms off. So to a parent, both of these kids look defiant, but emotionally, they are not the same child at all. One child is testing the power, the other is overwhelmed, exposed, and very defensive. When parents respond to both with punishment or, let's say, with power struggles, one child learns boundaries while the other one learns shame. And shame does not correct behavior, it actually distorts it. Before we continue, let's be very clear. Defiance absolutely does exist. True defiance is not fear. It is not an insecurity, and it's not an emotional overwhelm. True defiance is rooted in power, control, and a lot of entitlement. So what does true defiance look like? Well, it's repeated rule breaking without any remorse. It's escalation when you try to correct them. It's enjoyment of power struggle, so they enjoy this. It's constant blaming others. There's very minimal to no self-reflection, and it's consistent across environments, meaning if they do it at home, that means they do it elsewhere also. A truly defiant child does not emotionally fall apart after correction. They don't ruminate. They don't feel exposed, and they feel challenged. What's the best way to work with a child who is defiant? The best response is to try to stay calm, set very clear limits, have predictable consequences so when they do violate, they know what to expect, and have minimal emotional engagement because they thrive when you are very emotional. But here's what parents need to hear very clearly. Most children that are labeled defiant are actually not defiant. They are insecure. So insecurity is a fear-based behavior, and it is usually driven by fear of failure, rejection, disappointing others, and even being exposed and, you know what, not being good enough for others. But insecurity does not look like vulnerability, especially as kids get older. What happens is that the fears harden, so they turn into defensiveness, irritability, anger, avoidance, I don't care attitudes, and shutdowns. So, for example, say a parent asks, "Why didn't you turn in your assignment?" So the teen snaps it to the parent and says, "School is so stupid, I don't care." So what parents hear is disrespect. So what's going on internally, the teen is often thinking, I don't understand this. I'm behind. I feel stupid. I'm done. And I can't tolerate that feeling. So avoidance protects their self-worth when their competence feels very shaky to them. So in this case, punishment increases the shame, shame increases the avoidance, and avoidance looks like defiance when it actually isn't. This is very critical. Insecurity is not a thinking problem, it's a nervous system problem. When a child feels insecure, the brain shifts out of the thinking center, the prefrontal cortex, and it goes into survival mode. So, what does that mean? So, what that means is the logic drops, the language, the impulse control drops, and emotional volume increases. So when parents say they know better, or they're choosing this, or they're doing this on purpose, what's actually happening in this is insecurity hijacks access to the reasoning. You cannot lecture a nervous system into safety at all. And for everyone out there, insecurity does not require trauma. It does not require abuse. It often develops in well-intentioned homes. So the common contributors of this is when effort is met with criticism instead of support. Mistakes are corrected faster than emotions are actually comforted for these kids. Emotions are met with logic instead of empathy, and expectations exceed emotional capacity. And when love feels conditioned on performance. Now, I do have a series out about attachment style and empathy. And if you wanted to go back and listen to them, this would make more sense to you in understanding about the self esteem or insecurity of children. So I'm going to give you an example for this one. Let's say a struggling child hears, you're capable, you're just not trying. So what the child learns actually is trying equals exposure, okay? Failing equals shame, avoiding equals safety. That belief does not disappear. What happens over time, it actually evolves. Parents often say, they weren't like this when they were younger. I mean, how many of us have said that? And it's true, they weren't, because they were somebody else when they were younger, because younger kids still reach toward parents when they're insecure. So what they'll do is they'll cry, they might ask questions, or they'll even seek reassurance. Now, when adolescence happens, that changes everything. So then we get into teen brains. That's very hypersensitive to shame. They are focused on image now, they're wired for autonomy, and they're intolerant of vulnerability. So insecurity turns into sarcasm, eye rolling. We have those eye rollers, anger, withdrawal, and opposition. So an 8-year-old says, am I in trouble? While a 15-year-old says, whatever, who cares? It's the same fear, but what's happening, they have a different armor on. What can parents do? Parents must look at the patterns. It's not the moments. So insecurity patterns are emotional reactions. Do they have guilt afterward? Is there rumination? How about withdrawal? Or do they apologize later? Wanting reassurance, but they're actually resisting it. Versus the defiance patterns. There's a lot of escalation, there's mocking, there's no reflection, there's repetition, and there's constant power struggles. Here's the simplest distinction. Defiance feels entitled, while insecurity feels exposed. When insecurity is disciplined like defiance, what happens is fear increases and the trust decreases. And then the communication will start to shut down, and then the behavior escalates. So a parent says, all they give me is attitude. And what happens here is your teen hears you are the problem. So they stop talking to you. And then the parent says, well, they just shut us out. They don't talk to us. No, what they're actually doing is they're protecting themselves. Understanding insecurity does not mean removing the limits. What it means is you're changing how and when limits are delivered. So parents must regulate first, which, yes, parents, it can be a challenge. Correct second, and you validate emotion without excusing the behavior. Please avoid power struggles and be predictable. Be consistent. Scripts that parents can actually use are, I'm not okay with how you spoke to me, but I can see you're overwhelmed. We'll talk expectations once this settles. You're not in trouble, but we do need to talk about responsibility, or even I'm on your side even when we disagree. So it's always safety first, accountability second. Not every child who pushes back is defiant. Not every teen who shuts down is disrespectful. Sometimes what you're seeing is fear wearing its armor. And when fear is met with punishment, it won't disappear. It actually hardens and it gets worse. But when fear is understood, named, and guided, what happens? It transforms. Parents, I want you to take a look back. I want you to sit back a little bit. Sometimes you don't need more rules. The kids don't need harsher consequences. What they need is, everyone actually needs, is the clarity. Your child is not broken and you're not failing as a parent. And insecurity is not a character flaw. It's a response, and responses can change. So when parents learn to respond to what's underneath the behavior, discipline becomes guidance instead of damage. Connection replaces the control, and the trust begins to rebuild. If this episode resonated, I want you to know that you're not alone. I've created a companion parent guide to go with this episode, breaking down defiance versus insecurity, the red flags that parents miss, the growth signs that often go unnoticed, and self assessment to help you reflect on your own patterns. You'll find it linked in the episode description. I'm Maria Shkreli, and this is Breaking Up with Toxicity. Awareness is where challenge begins, and understanding is where healing starts. Until next time.